economist and professor. We're just going to click continue there. Everybody can click continue so we can record this. Perfect. Linda is an economist and a professor at Carnegie Mellon, and really started out their whole research program in School of Sciences. And after we understand really the setup and what's going on for women today, we're then going to move into the work of Richard Schell at the Wharton School of Business to help uncover your unique bargaining style and the 4 stages of negotiation. Finally, we're going to end the session with what we as women can do differently to really set ourselves up for negotiation success and build a plan for yourself. Now, everybody should have a workbook that goes along with this program. One of the things that we asked you to do prior to coming into the session today was to go through your bargaining style assessment. If you haven't done that, that's okay. There's plenty of time for you to do that after the session. But I will be asking those of you that did take that assessment to share those results with us so we can start to see how our unique bargaining style shows up for each one of us. Okay. The hope is really that we walk away from today feeling more confident and in control out of what we can get out of our life. And the first stage of that is being more prepared with as much information as we possibly can. All right, so I would love for you to open up your chat feature. This is the first question that I've got for everybody. I would love to know, do you believe negotiations to have a primarily negative or positive connotation for you? I want you to type that into the chat feature. All you need to do is throw a negative or positive, whatever it is for you, just whatever first comes to mind. No judgment. We got a lot of negatives. We got some positives, negatives. Yep. Okay. Perfect. Negative, positive. Okay. So we're a little bit all over the board, which is totally normal. And I want you to think about, for those of us that put negative in there, because I definitely have been in that camp as well, really thinking about negotiations as being more of a negative. I want you to think about the choice that you're making when you are tying a belief, either negative or positive, to this idea of negotiations. I want you to think about how you define negotiations, how you perceive it, okay? Now, I would like for all of you in this moment right now to release that negativity associated with negotiation and be willing to just allow yourself and your mindset to really shift with me today. Rather than seeing this as really a competition, I want you to see negotiations as like a discussion. Okay, there's no win or lose. We're just having a conversation around something that we want to eventually get a certain result out of. Okay, so it's a discussion that can ultimately lead us to something that we want. And here's why that's important for us. We want to have more comfort around having these discussions because really, well, the reasons are endless, but here are a couple of facts around where we stand today as women. Now, prior to COVID, women were participating in the workplace more than they ever had before. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that close to 2 million women are looking to leave the workforce because of the strains that they had dealt with as a result of the pandemic. There's some disturbing research that was done by McKinsey and Company that really outlined all of the additional stressors that women are being faced with, like the additional, load of childcare as well as working. And for women of color, especially Black women, that disproportionate impact that the pandemic had on their communities amidst all of the continued social injustices that were being faced, we see that there's so much additional strain. What we know is that nearly half of women, about 44%, were the primary breadwinners inside of their household. And even 90% of the women that are on this session today, at some point in time, will be solely responsible for the direct contribution of their family finances, at least at some point in time in our lives. And based on the recent census data, on average, Asian women in the United States were paid just 87% of what white men were paid. White women were paid about 79% of what white men were paid. And if you're a non-Asian woman of color, you were paid even less. On average, Black women were paid about 62% of what white men were paid. Latino women are paid on average 54% of white men are paid. And of course, that isn't a comprehensive representation of all women of color. Now, I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to any of you. There are obviously systemic issues that still exist in our world that must be addressed. Like even the fact that we're charged higher rates for mortgages and are more likely to be ripped off on our auto repairs, or the fact that men get preferential treatment in negotiations by being just given access to more information proactively. Women are also lied to more often than men in negotiations, and this is just absolutely horrible, but we're seen as incompetent, and as such, we are assumed not to necessarily question what we are being told. So really, really quite horrible. Another fun fact, on top of making about 20 to almost 46% less, women are also getting charged 7% more on average for our basic goods and services. That's about $1,400 more a year for what we consider to be the pink tax, right? So again, the greatest blow being to, of course, women of color. Just for giggles, I went out there and I calculated what my current lifetime pink tax is. And at $1,400 a year for 40 years, I've paid about $56,000 more for those basic goods and services like razors, or, if you go into the store and you see the blue, there's pictures out there like the blue helmet for kids versus the pink helmet for kids, right? And so the additional expense that we pay just for the female version, okay? Now, let's see, what is the percentage of payment Black and Latino women were paid to white women? So if you were to go back and look at some of this information here, so you would need to do the calculation there between, so all of this is compared to white men. My math on the fly is not the greatest, but if you wanted to screenshot this, you can get all of that calculation for yourself right there. So, as we go through some of those discoveries that we have today, I want you to challenge yourself. Ask yourself, how much of this gap do we women have a responsibility for closing? I believe that it's a fair amount. That's our responsibility for how we show up. Our biggest issue is that we aren't asking for the things that we want because we have this inner voice that tells us not to. Okay. 85% of women fear negotiations when it comes to new jobs. We have this fear of negotiating, leaving us with less confidence, lower balances in our accounts, and settling for things in life that we don't actually need to settle for. In fact, by not negotiating our first salary, a female actually runs the risk of leaving anywhere from $650,000 to $1 million on the table over the course of our career. Over $500,000 left behind, basically because of the decision to say yes, thank you, and then not asking for more. Here's another crazy statistic. Only 2.8% of venture capital dollars in 2019 were given to female founding companies. Now, the good news is that's actually up 0.8% since 2017. However, the dollars that are given out to help grow businesses are still going primarily to male founded businesses. So why don't we negotiate more often? And what would it actually look like if we did? Now, when it comes to approaching how we are perceived in negotiations, we are faced with some societal stereotypes. Men are typically seen as assertive, decisive, factual, self-oriented, where women are typically seen as warm and friendly and expressive and emotional and others-oriented. So if a man is seen as assertive, that's typically something that would actually go into a positive performance review for him. Whereas if a woman is seen as assertive, it's likely meant that she will be called bossy or not easy to be around. In fact, there's a study that was done that showed that both men and women are less interested in working with a woman who tries to negotiate her salary. I believe that that has to do with the fact that often women who try to really negotiate on their own behalf, they take on their male counterpart traits. So what you see there in that list there on the screen. When what we actually should be doing is trying to use our natural feminine traits to our advantage. On average, women tend to be more others-oriented and relational. We often find ourselves sacrificing something that we want for the sake of the group or for other people or our families. Therefore, it really shouldn't come as a surprise that when women are far more that women are far more effective when they're negotiating on behalf of others. Does anybody feel that way? Have you ever found that it's much easier for you to negotiate on behalf of others? Just going to look at your heads and see if you're nodding here. How do you feel about that? Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I find that to be the case for me as well. So when I'm putting myself into that mindset, even if I'm in a negotiation, let's say it's for my own personal salary or for a car or for buying that house or negotiating with the kids on some situation, right? If we, instead of just put ourselves there and think about negotiating for us, if we think about the family unit, or if we think about the benefit to the company, or if we think about, how it's going to impact the community, if we put ourselves in that other focused mindset when we are having that negotiation, we will do much better. So I want you to kind of process that for a moment and think about every time you go into a negotiation, is there a way for you to see how that negotiation is going to actually benefit not just you, but a broader audience? It will put you in a mindset where you are going to be more in control of how you show up, okay? I also want you to ask yourself, why do you think that these differences exist? What is the impact that these differences have on our overall societal message? But more importantly, I want you to think about and maybe jot this question down and really ponder it after your session today. Think about, how have those societal messages impacted your own personal negotiation narrative? Think about how it's had an impact for you, because we all have a story that we've been telling ourselves. For me, I believe that these messages really do play a role on that inner voice assumption that we have, creating this non-serving story. We must overcome that inner voice within ourselves that ultimately prevents us from getting what we want, especially when it comes to negotiation on our own behalf, right? So one of the most simplistic and self-destructive inner voice assumptions that I've experienced personally, and I mentioned this prior to us, starting the session today. So I've always had this inner voice narrative that if it were negotiable, I would have been told. Has anybody ever had that thought? If this was something that was negotiable, somebody would have told me. All the time. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So it's one of those things that if we have these belief systems that we decide to carry around about our negotiation narrative, and one of them is like, well, if it was negotiable, somebody would tell me. Or I was thinking, as we were talking about car negotiations prior to starting the session, I always thought, as if I was going in and negotiating for my lease, maybe they wouldn't tell me if it was negotiable, but they would at least give me the information that I needed. Like they wouldn't be holding information back. So I believed that we were working with the same set of information. And that's just not necessarily true. So what we want to do is we want to start telling ourselves a more effective narrative. Here's the thing. Everything is negotiable. Literally everything. There is nothing out there that is not negotiable. I did not realize that for a very, very long time. So I would find myself going into a situation and just taking what I was told and not wanting to have the conversation because I almost felt like if I did, it would be embarrassing. Like I should know whether or not this was negotiable. So if I asked, then I would be putting myself, or I would be like showing my cards that I didn't know something. So now I take a very different approach. I just assume that everything is negotiable, and I get really comfortable with hearing somebody push back. And even if they say no the first time, I don't take it as a challenge, but I really think like, they're saying no because they don't yet know why I am asking for it. So as I was going through this house buying process, I got very good at telling people my story and what it is that I was really looking for. A little bit later on, we're going to talk all about positions versus interests and getting those out on the table. It's a really critical component of the negotiation process. But I told myself, one, everything is negotiable. And all I need to do is ask and get really comfortable with sharing my position and my interest so that everybody was on the same page. Because oftentimes we're just in a different space when we're having those discussions. Like, I'll give you an example. So when I was going through the house buying process, one of the things that I needed to do in order to be the top bidder for the house was allow the existing owner to stay inside of the house for 2 months without paying me additional rent. That was one of the concessions that I made. And I was like, you know what? That doesn't actually bother me because I've already allocated the money for that period of time. It aligns with the move-in date that I was hoping for anyway. I'm willing to give that up as a concession, but I also would like him to do some work during that period of time. The owner happened to also be the general contractor that had done the flip of the house. So he was going to be living in the house for an additional 2 months. And I was like, I'm perfectly fine with that. As long as, and this is my concession, my position and my interest, as long as you are willing to do these little odd jobs around the house during that time frame so that when I move in, everything is just ready to go. And he's like, absolutely, that would be no problem. But I really need those extra 2 months because I'm going to be looking for the next house that I'm going to go into that I'm planning on flipping. So really getting clear about the narratives that we're telling ourselves and the stories and the assumptions that we have, because the moment that we start to break that down, the better off that we're going to be. What I find super interesting, some of the research that Linda Babcock had done, one of her studies was where she found out that women are more likely to believe that their circumstances are controlled by others, while men are more likely to believe that they can influence their circumstances and the opportunities that they have through their own actions. And that's not super surprising to me. If you think about women's history, we can go back and look for evidence to believe that to be true. Women were long barred from access to formal education, denied the right to vote, denied the right to own property, controlling our own bodies. There are many parts of women's identities where historically it's rested in the hand of some sort of external forces. So the good news is that we can actually start to change that inner voice and look for evidence out there in the world to prove the fact that we do have control over what it is that we are thinking about the circumstances that we're in, and then really at the end influence the outcome that we get. So we can start to rewrite our story so that any of the past experiences that we have only play a positive force in the way that we create our negotiation narrative. Can I return to the prior screen? Let's see. So this one here, is this the one you're looking for, Yvonne? And if that's not, I would be happy. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, on this one, I really want you to think about, how have those societal messages impacted my personal negotiation narrative? What is my personal negotiation narrative? How do I believe that what I'm seeing out in the world is shaping the way that I show up in these conversations? Because ultimately, negotiations are all around us, right? We've been talking about it. It's, the way that we are having conversation with the kids. It's the negotiation. I was saying, I negotiated with myself last night on whether or not I was going to have a glass of wine at the end of the evening, if that was really something that I wanted to be doing. So we have negotiations happening all of the time. And it really is our responsibility to educate ourselves on how to effectively negotiate on our behalf, so that we don't continue to, especially, leave money on the table. Now, I'm curious, what are some of the negotiations that you have faced recently? Go ahead and type into the chat function, like what have you experienced recently? Let's say over the last 30 days. What are some of the negotiations that you have gone through yourself? Give you a second to type that in here. Wedding planning. Oh my gosh. Wedding planning is like the ultimate experience in negotiation. Anything, tell me a little bit. We got some new vehicles, some furniture delivery. This is great. A new client, screen time with the kids. Yeah. I want to go back to that wedding planning. So thinking through, like, that is an exercise in every single step along the way. And we have these beliefs that, they set the prices and that's what it is for this many people. And like, it's just such a great way for us to practice over and over and over and over again in very rapid succession, this managing of our mind and thinking through what it is that we could be doing a little bit differently. New apartment lease. Yeah, I haven't paid. So up until now, this is the very first house that I've ever purchased, but the last 4 places that I have rented, I have negotiated that price down pretty significantly to the tune of like $1,500 in most of the instances, every single time that I have gotten a new lease. So again, the money that we're leaving on the table without just asking and seeing what could be potentially a negotiation tactic. In this last house, the one that I'm actually in right now, one of the things that I did was, there are only 2 cars in our household and there's a 3-car garage. So one of the things that I negotiated was, hey, I would love to pay a lower rent. We don't need that 3rd bay. So if you want to continue to use that 3rd bay as storage for yourself, let's knock $400 off the rent for that specifically. And so we were able to negotiate by just deciding, like, what do we want versus what don't we want. Bedtime, screen time, how much to buy for groceries each week, approval, increasing staffing, getting pre-qualified for loans, compensation. Yeah. So we can see that they're all around us, right? Every single day gives us an opportunity to flex our muscles. And I want you to think about, like, what you're making those negotiations mean. Regardless of the outcome, what tends to happen if we go through a negotiation and maybe we didn't experience it the way that we had wanted to, we then start to judge ourselves and we tell ourselves, like, I'm no good at this. And that's not helpful at all. What we want to do is we want to tell ourselves we're learning. Every opportunity, even the master negotiators that are out there, go into negotiations and sometimes don't come out with the results that they were hoping for. But the difference between those master negotiators and maybe us, especially as we're getting started, is they don't use that against themselves. What they do is they use it as an opportunity to learn. And they get curious about what happened at each stage and where did they start to feel uncomfortable. What would have, and the other thing is, how often, tell me, for everybody that's experienced something recently, maybe if you could tell me, did you go back and look at the negotiation after and do a little bit of a postmortem to decide what could you do differently the next time? Did anybody go through that process to really analyze what took place and see areas of opportunities? Okay, so we've got a yes for one. Fabulous. All of the time. Yes. Great. Oh my gosh, this is so good. I want, for those of you that haven't gone through that process, give yourself time after the negotiation to really go back and identify, what could we do differently? What could I do differently after or in the next situation so that I show up the way that I really want to show up? Okay. That's so great. All right. So let's talk a little bit about knowing yourself. Professor Shell at the Wharton School of Business, all of his research has really shown us that credibility is the most important asset inside of a successful negotiation. So teaching you a string of tactics that don't necessarily fit your own personal style really are bound to cause you to come off as super scripted and maybe a little bit insincere. When the other party picks up on that insincerity, they're immediately going to put you at a disadvantage and will maybe, reduce the terms that you're able to then achieve, or maybe even come to a complete impasse in that particular negotiation. Now, hopefully everybody's had that opportunity to take that bargaining style assessment inside of the workbook. I would love for you all to go into the chat feature and tell me, if you did take the assessment, what was your style? Okay. And anything where you scored 70% or higher, those are going to be your styles. I personally, I'm an accommodator and a compromiser. I tend to really find myself in, we've got compromiser, avoider, accommodator equally. Great. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, what we want to do is really start to understand how we show up and how we can use that to our advantages. Okay. So anything where we have that 70 or higher, that's going to signal that we have a strong inclination to engage in that type of behavior within the negotiation. Any scores that are 30% or lower are going to signal that very weak inclination and things that we tend to do less often or only when we are pushed. Okay. And then again, if you haven't had the opportunity to do this, don't worry, you can go back after the session and take that. So we've got some compromisers, accommodators, accommodating, avoiding an accommodator, compromiser, collaborator, avoider, accommodator. Okay, so these are great. Compromisers. Do we have any competitors in the house? Any competitors? It's going to be the first one that I start with. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about each one of these styles. And I want you to think about, your style as it works with this other style. Okay, so when you are going up against a competitor, how does your style show up? How do you feel when you're working with this type of person? So in terms of our competitor, okay, these folks love the negotiation game. They absolutely love it. So if you are working with a competitor, if your counterparty is a competitor, know that they're going to want to focus on the win. They're also going to want to focus on results. The key way that you can get them to come into your space and really be more accommodating for you, especially if you yourself are an accommodator, is ask them for their advice. Competitors love to be considered as like the expert. So when you ask them for advice, it almost disarms them a little bit and it brings them into more of that collaborative environment. So they'll be giving you advice and they will become more invested in the outcome for you. Okay. So if we're trying to not necessarily disarm, but at least bring that competitor into a level playing field, that's going to be a really wonderful technique for you. Also, be careful on the concessions that you provide. So they're going to look for the ability to get as much information out of you, and they're going to keep as much as they possibly can close to the vest. Okay. So they're not necessarily going to want to share as much. But they will be pulling concessions out of you as much as they can. Some of the body language, they're going to be leaning in when you're having that conversation, and they're going to have really direct responses. Okay. They're also going to intensely listen as much as they can because they want to catch people and use the words that they're hearing and kind of spin it back around. Okay. So just be very clear with what it is that you're saying. I would use a script beforehand. You don't have to actually have the script going into the conversation, but I would script out what I want to say prior to going into a conversation with a competitor. And obviously, if you don't know the person that you're going into this negotiation with, you want to look for some of those body cues. And just, try to weed out pretty quickly whether or not you think this person is a competitor. If that's the case, then just, I would switch over into that asking for advice pretty quickly. We'll talk about the stages of the negotiation here in just a moment. So I'll point out where exactly you should probably start to know what your counterpart's bargaining style is in the actual anatomy of the negotiation. All right, for our collaborators on the call, because we have a number of collaborators on the call. So you guys are looking for the best solution, right? You want to make sure that everybody is being heard. So those two heads are better than one, pulling other people into the discussion as much as possible. So you'll be able to identify pretty quickly if you're working with a collaborator, if they are wanting to see what other people's opinions are, or making sure that they get as much information so that they can find a solution that's going to be really positive for everyone. What I want you to do, if that counterparty is a collaborator, let them know like that you're interested in finding a solution for them. So like incorporate them into the process and say you're willing to find other people's points of views, but also make sure that you keep the process moving with this person, because they're going to want to go out and find other people to bring into the discussion, and can sometimes lengthen the negotiation as a result of it. So you want to make sure that you're keeping the conversation moving along. Maybe you have a little bit more of a structure to it so that you aren't allowing it to get derailed. But just make sure that you're engaging them in the dialogue. They want to show that they're a good team player, and it's really important to get their perspective, especially on complex problems, because they want to see things from different point of views. All right, our compromisers. So when you are negotiating with a compromiser, if that counterparty is a compromiser, what you want to do is really spend some extra time probing on their interests and their needs. We also want to, if we're trying to make sure that the relationship is one that is built over time, we want to project fair and reasonable aspects of the negotiation. So we want to call attention to areas that we are helping to compromise. So one of the things that I did, if I go back to the compromise in my house negotiation, I wanted to showcase that I was willing to make concessions where it was going to be mutually beneficial for both of us. So calling attention to that really gives you the opportunity to expand the relationship over time. Okay. The way that you're going to call attention and kind of know if this person is a compromiser is they're going to want to resolve the matters really quickly and then move on. I always urge you to pay attention that sometimes this person is going to be okay with making a decision or like going with the first option. So if you are a compromiser, make sure that you have acknowledged that ahead of time. Maybe look for some of the situations in the past where you have gone with the first thing and then maybe, felt some regret afterwards that you jumped on the first option, and then create a little bit of a barrier for yourself, knowing that that's your tendency. How do you want to show up in this upcoming negotiation so that you don't just go with the first option? So some of those, that pre-work is going to be really critical for you. On the avoider side, if you are working with this type of person, if you're negotiating with this person, they're going to be, potentially easily distracted, maybe not as much eye contact, maybe trying to change the subject or avoid talking about certain aspects, kind of dancing around the actual topics. So when you are negotiating with an avoider, you want to reassure them that the process is going to be smooth. And you want to focus on the unambiguous standards and norms of that negotiation. So you want to make sure that you're really bringing them in and calling attention to what needs to be discussed. If you yourself are an avoider, again, identify maybe some of those areas that you yourself want to skirt around and not discuss, and then ask yourself the question, why do I want to avoid having this conversation? Why do I want to avoid this particular topic? What is it that I'm thinking? And I'm going to go through this kind of self-coaching model here in just a second, which is so powerful for negotiations. But what is it that I'm thinking about having this conversation that is making me feel maybe a little bit uneasy? And when I feel uneasy or insecure, what is the action that I take? And then ultimately from those actions, what do I get in terms of a result? So asking yourself powerfully beforehand, where do I think that maybe I'm going to try to avoid having a particular conversation will set you up for success once you actually get into the negotiation. Finally, on the accommodator side, especially if your counterparty is an accommodator, what you want to do is you want to show your appreciation for the relationship. And you also want to be prepared to reciprocate, because chances are they are going to throw out a lot of concessions. They want to be super helpful. They want to solve problems. And they want to make sure that the relationship is going to be super solid. So oftentimes they will throw out more concessions than maybe you were expecting. Okay, so that could be a key indicator for you if you are negotiating with somebody that's like trying to people please, or is really trying to be overly social and friendly. So they tend to be accommodators. So you want to make sure that you're starting to pick up on that when you're in the actual negotiation. Now, depending on what kind of negotiation you're going into, let's say that you're going into a car dealership, right? Chances are they've gone through their own sales training, and they themselves will know if they tend to be, let's say, an accommodator or a collaborator, and they have been trained on how to overcome those particular traits that they have, so that they're showing up, even though it's not necessarily their natural tendency, they're showing up as that competitor. So identifying prior to going into the situation, if you don't know the person that you're negotiating with, what kind of situation am I walking into, and what can I tend to expect out of that negotiation? And not just pigeonholing yourself into, thinking that you're going to only be working with a competitor, but just acknowledging that this tends to be a situation where people show up as more of a competitor. How am I going to prepare myself to be ready to have a negotiation with a competitor? But also, what do I want to be looking out for so that I can maximize my own personal style here and make sure that I'm not leaving too much money on the table, or I'm not getting what it is that I'm really wanting to. One of the greatest techniques, and I would love for anybody to put into the chat function, your experience with this. I find, and research also tells us, that the more we are willing to walk away from a particular situation, if we are not powerfully tying ourselves to the outcome and really, really wanting whatever it is that we're trying to get, if we're willing to walk away, chances are the negotiation will open up and give us more room and opportunity to truly negotiate and then ultimately get what we're looking for. But when we go into it and we are so focused on the outcome and trying to get, let's call it the win, we tend to create more of a limiting situation where we give our cards and our power over to the person that we are negotiating with. So I think about, if again, I go back to, since it's the most recent example that I have here, the house buying process right now, I told you it didn't feel like a negotiation, because I really, at least in the particular situation, the house that I ended up getting, I really wanted that house. It was already in my mind 100%. I was getting that house, and I was almost willing to do anything in order to get that outcome. But there were many other houses that I placed bids on prior to getting that particular house where I was willing to negotiate because I was also willing to walk away. So you need to decide ahead of time, where is your, what is the point in which you're willing to walk away? And if you are willing to walk away, what is going to be your best next alternative to that particular negotiation? What are you going to do after the negotiation? What is your other option that you can have on the table? All right. Now, all of that's super good to know. But I really believe that the key to our success comes from understanding the anatomy of the negotiation and and ultimately where we're going to spend the bulk of our time during the negotiation. Now, step one is preparation. Research has shown us that when women adequately prepare for a negotiation, we have higher rates of success. So we want to be sure to not only prepare for the facts, but also prepare for all of the perceptions and those preconceived notions that we have. This is where I also incorporate my self-coaching model that I talked about just a moment ago. So let's talk about that quickly. I recommend you just take a screenshot of this. Take out your camera and screenshot this for a second. This is not inside of your workbook. So essentially, the circumstance is the facts. That's the negotiation. Okay. So if we're going into a negotiation, either for a new job or a raise, or we're, working with a new client, or we're, negotiating with the kids, whatever the case may be, right? Those are the facts. We then have thoughts or beliefs about that circumstance or facts. Our thoughts generate our feelings generate our actions, and then our actions generate our results. So if we are looking to get a particular result out of that negotiation, what we want to do is manage our mind. We believe that it's the circumstance or the actual negotiation, like the facts of the situation, that will determine the result that we get. When in reality, it's what we are choosing to think about it. So if we're going in believing, this is going to be really difficult, that's going to be what we create for ourselves. But if we go in believing I'm incredibly prepared for this, I'm super, that would create a feeling of confidence for me. And when I come into that negotiation from a place of confidence, when I'm confident, I usually take action ahead of time to gather the information that I need, and then be in that negotiation in a very different way. Then the result that I get from that place of confidence in the actions that I took is usually a better situation in terms of the outcome. So again, we just really want to be managing our mind, and that comes in that first preparation stage, what we are choosing to think before we go into the situation. Step number 2 is really the information exchange. Okay. So oftentimes men tend to outright say what their accomplishments are, or why they are actually credible. Whereas women, we use the relationship building process to slowly build and express that. I want you to be careful here. Don't miss the opportunity to establish what you want or what you need. This is the point in time where we really want to start to flesh out our positions and our interests of both parties. I recommend after this session, you go onto YouTube and you type in getting to yes, interests versus positions. Getting to yes, interests versus positions. This is a video that's based on the work by Fisher and Urey. And I'm going to tell you right now, the example that they use of the orange, it's totally sexist and very whitewashed, as most negotiation examples are. But I want you to start to see the difference between positions and interests. Essentially, in that video, there's a man and a woman walking into a supermarket. They both go to grab an orange, and they both say, I want the orange. There's only one left. And they kind of come to this decision where if, they split the orange in half, they both get half. Looks like a win-win. But the reason that it would be important for them to share their actual interests and positions, they're both interested in getting the orange, but their true, or rather their position is they both want the orange, but their interest in the orange is different. This is where it becomes sexist. So the woman wants the peel of the orange to make a pie, and the man wants the actual fruit because he wants to eat it. So if they had fleshed out what their interests were, they would have established that there's an even better solution than just cutting the orange down the middle. So this is really where you start to exchange that information and can flesh out those interests and positions. Step 3, bargaining. This is where you start aligning those positions and interests. And by this point in time, this is where you should start to notice the person's bargaining style. Okay. So if you didn't know them ahead of time, you should be able to start seeing some of what their bargaining style is and start to adjust your communication to meet theirs. And then finally, step 4 is the commitment. And this is where we really solidify that deal. Not only do we want to cement our vision for the deal and create the accountability structure, but we also want to make sure it's in writing. The video name, it was Getting to Yes, interest versus positions. Okay, getting to yes, interest versus positions. So yeah, we want to make sure it's in writing. I was having a conversation with one of my girlfriends the other day, and she was having a negotiation with her daughter. It was super funny. So they were parking, and she needed $10 for the parking, but she didn't actually have any cash on her. However, she had just paid the kids their allowance, and she knew that they had cash on them. So what she ended up doing was striking a deal with her daughter to borrow $10 at a 1% daily interest rate. And then they sealed the deal with a text message of all of the details of that deal. So it was a really great way for her to even just share, a learning opportunity with her daughter about creating negotiations and how to make sure that she was getting what she wanted out of the deal as well. All right. So let's, before I close this, I would love for you just to tell me, based on those, and I'll go back a slide here for a second, based on each of those stages, where do you believe you should be spending the bulk of your time? Which one of those stages? And you can just put into the chat feature 1, 2, 3, or 4. Where are we spending the bulk of our time?
Oh, where are we spending?
1, preparation. Absolutely. You hit it right on the head. We should be spending a significant amount of our time there. In fact, I tend to spend about 75% of my time in preparation to make sure those other phases go real smoothly. All right. I would also suggest you take a quick picture of these phrases. These are not in your workbook either, but these are some really great ways for you to shift the negotiation if you are interested in feeling that you're getting a little bit of pushback during that actual discussion that you're having. All right, I know we only have 5 minutes left here, and I want to make sure that we've got enough time for any questions. Ultimately, here's what you can do differently, okay? We can start by changing our story. If we've got that narrative in our mind that negotiations are negative and that we've had past experiences where it hasn't necessarily worked out, and we're carrying all of that belief system into our upcoming negotiations, we're not going to set ourselves up for success. So we want to change our story and believe that negotiations just a discussion. There's no more intense version of negotiations than just a regular discussion. It's just a discussion. It's a simple conversation. Everything is negotiable. Every single thing in life. There is no reason that we cannot ask. My mother, I grew up in a family business, and my mother thought that she was going to take over alongside of my uncle. She thought she was going to take over the family business and have the two of them running it when my grandfather decided to retire. She just believed that that was going to be what happened because of conversations that had been had. My uncle, at some point in time before the actual transfer happened, came in and asked my grandfather if he could run the business by himself. My mother didn't think that she had to ask. So just getting out there and asking for what you want and believing that it cannot hurt to ask, that is one thing that she instilled in me after she experienced that in her own life. So she said, there's no harm in asking. And that is so very true. Prepare for your negotiations. Teach the next generation to get out there and be assertive, and then recognize that there are opportunities in your life daily that will really help you to make those negotiations stick. Okay. All right. I want to open it up for questions. What questions do we have on negotiations? If you don't ask, the answer is always no. That is so true, right? You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, to quote Lizzo. So yeah, I really appreciate your time today. I would love to answer whatever questions you have. If you want to raise your hand if you've got a question, we can make sure you get unmuted. Also, feel free to type something into the chat feature. I'm also going to, while we're waiting for people to chime in, here are some additional resources. Again, fast and furious. I could spend all day talking to you and diving deeper into this topic, but here are some really amazing resources specifically for women. Again, this is not in your workbook, so take a picture of this if you want these resources. Can you give a few specifics about the opening? Yes. Oh God, great question. So when you are opening a negotiation, one of the things that you want to be thinking about is how much information do you have? So we always, if we have a lot of information, it's okay for us to open the negotiation. But if we feel like there's an imbalance of information, that we don't have as much information as maybe the person that we're negotiating with, we want them to open. Okay. We want them to set let's say it's a price, or to give their terms first. So we then can react to it by then being able to either ask more questions or flesh out additional pieces of information that will put us in a better position. So we want to make sure, and there's actually a chart inside of your workbook on who should open based on the amount of information that you have. But I always say, if you feel like you don't have a lot of the information, allow the other person to open first. Now, they may throw out a number that you think is astronomical. That's where I would come back and say, gosh, that's not necessarily close to what I had in mind. Let's start to maybe close the gap a little bit from there. But yeah, if you've got more information, then it's perfectly appropriate for you to start the negotiation by throwing something out. Great point. What other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, situations, stories would you like to share?
Lindsay, very quick, we are okay to share this presentation for our participants, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We will be following up with the recording and presentation link for all of you participating today.
Perfect. Yeah. How do you negotiate when there's one of you and three of them? Great question. So if you were to give me a little bit more specifics, I could maybe give you some more techniques. It really comes down to, what do you know ahead of time? What kind of information can you gather? What is the particulars around what you're negotiating for? Putting yourself in a situation where you feel like you actually have more to negotiate for. If we go back to when you're negotiating, not just on your own behalf, but if you can think about, how am I negotiating for more people than just me, whether it's your family, your team, your organization, your community, that will put more people in your corner. So it doesn't feel like it's you against three people. It's actually multiple people negotiating with three people. I would put myself in that, without more specifics. That's how I would really start to look at that particular situation. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. What other questions can I answer?
I have a question. It might be quicker to ask, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate what you've presented today. So I'm just reading now that because my organization's getting ready to go to a hybrid model, that
Okay.
that we know women already will be disadvantaged based on many more choosing to be hybrid. One, because also trying to take care of children as well, and kind of still doing it all. What type of negotiation can be suggested, so that we already know there's not necessarily a level playing field around compensation and various things like that, but just to be proactive so that we don't continue to see that curve go the other way?
Yeah, so I would start to ask myself, what are the other areas in which I would want to negotiate? Because again, everything is negotiable. So whether it's additional time off, flexibility, I would also manage my mind around what I believe going into the negotiation, what preconceived notions I have about the flexibility and about the hybrid model. So I would try to get all of those thoughts out onto paper prior to going into the negotiation, all of the negative thoughts, and then ask myself, what do I want to choose to think? And then what are some of the concessions that I'm willing to make? And what are some of those non-negotiables Where am I willing to walk away? So sometimes when we go into a negotiation and we are not willing to walk away, we've already got a job and we're just switching models within that organization. We limit ourselves. We like back ourselves into a corner because we believe, I can't leave. I can't leave because I've already got a good job and it might be hard to find another one. And I've been with the organization for a long time and this is how I'm supporting my family, so on and so forth. But if we start to open ourselves up to the possibility that, this is something that matters to me. These are the non-negotiables. If I don't get, additional time off, or if I don't have flexibility or the amount of time that I need to be sitting at my desk that's being tracked every day, or maybe the stipend that I get for childcare, like you can go back to even large organizations and say, here are the things, if you're not going to pay me more, here are the other things that I am looking for. But you always need to be willing to find another place to go, to find another job, in order for it to be as powerful as it possibly can be. But when we start to believe that we don't have other options, that's what limits our options totally. It's not that there aren't actually options that are out there, it's that we believe that there aren't. So
I just have one
please.
follow-up then. So
Please.
the other impact is that those who are working hybrid are getting less opportunity for promotion.
Okay.
And what would that then look like or sound like possibly?
Yeah. So if that is true, then I would start to negotiate for how are promotions being reviewed, and like, is it FaceTime? Is it projects? Like, what are the promotions being based on for those that are actually getting it? And then negotiating on behalf of those that are in the hybrid model for creating more of those opportunities. So that's what I would put on the table for whomever you're negotiating with in leadership is, what we're seeing is these are the people that are getting promoted. These are the hybrid folks. This is the discrepancy between those two opportunities. So we would like to negotiate that we get this many more of those types of opportunities added to the lineup for each of those individuals. Is that helpful? Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. What other questions do we have?
Maybe we'll take one last question.
Well, if there aren't any last questions, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you found this information valuable. Again, it's fast and furious and just touching the tip of the iceberg. These are some of my favorite resources that I have here on the screen personally that I have gone through and really found valuable. The leanin.org has really incredible resources and videos and sessions and even some online discussions and communities for women as they're trying to increase their negotiation exposure. So I find it to be a really wonderful place for all things negotiation. So I hope you found this valuable.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lindsay, for a great presentation and coaching us how to turn the negotiation into opportunities. And also thank you, Eddie Nassar and Blake Sayre of Janus Henderson, and our PFS marketing coordinator, Michelle Velada, for helping to make this event possible. Lastly, I would like to make you all aware of the second opinion services that Point Financial Services offer to clients and community friends. We're happy to set aside a block of time to dive deeper into your current financial situation, identify possible gaps, and provide preliminary feedback to you. So I welcome the opportunity to speak with you on this offer, and please feel free to contact me at amy@planfinancial.com. You can also visit our website at www.planfinancial.com. And once again, thank you for your time. Have a great summer. We will connect with you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.